Hello, this is the video for Thursday, October 1st for 11th grade English. Our topic today is the British Here to Stay. We are looking at the very end of our Native America unit. We're moving into early colonial history. We have a poem, a quick podcast, and then we'll look at some texts. And there is another quiz in Common Lit today, but this time purely individual. And it's a letter from Chief Powhatan to John Smith. So really capping off the end of our Native America unit with one last text from one of our Indian characters. Our poem is by Deborah Nystrom, who's a professor over at UVA of poetry. And she writes a lot about growing up in an area that's in the Dakotas, populated with Native Americans. So Dakota here is really more about westward expansion. We're not going to get to the Dakotas yet, but I thought it was really nice for some other features that I'll go into. Day by day, the Missouri dropping lower under empty sky that had drained Okobojo, No Heart Creek, White Man Draw every night, still no moisture. Finally, a season late, the raw, parched air turned and gathered over hard pan above Hawaii, grumbling and breaking open all at once, sending runnels across the flats, to spread and join and drag toward the river's edge, snatches of roots torn from ground where wind had settled the seeds once. Afterwards, Will and Ellie, tromping in mud, scanned the rutted cow paths for arrowheads that might have surfaced. Traces of black buffalo, Bigfoot, touched the clouds. Quartz or chert or flint notch chipped to different sizes and points for buffalo, deer, pheasant, flushed out with a human howl. Maybe with fire lit to the grasses, bitter scent of ash twisting in dust Ellie could smell. Like her own name unraveling as she poked a glittering rock with her stick, heard the meadowlark's question change to sputter, last flick of wings. Whatever she and Will might lift, turn over in their hands, take home, hide among their things. Even relief after rain did not belong to them. I love this poem for its use of slant rhyme. I want to just show you what that is. So every end rhyme here is slant. It's not perfect rhyme, or what we say sometimes masculine rhyme. Those are the correct poetry terms, not my adjectives. Those rhymes, masculine, perfect rhymes, are hard sounds, like draw and saw. Slant rhyme plays with that. Endings of the words come together in the same way, even if the word doesn't sound the same. So sky and every, you can even just watch my mouth ending in the exact same way that it lifts at the end. Flats, roots, afterwards, arrowheads, same. Foot and different, that T sound repeats. Each couplet, each two lines is paired together with a slant. Howl and smell, paired. Rock and flick, paired. And then home, them, paired. So really effective slant rhyme. It works so well with this poem about scavenging, taking things that don't belong to you, but not really being guilty of a crime either, just not being fully aware of the history that you're scavenging. And so in this collection, things don't feel quite right. Neither does the rhyme. So a gorgeous example of some of the bittersweetness, the sadness even, of this whole unit. I'm going to play this podcast next, speaking of this imperfection, because the episode on Crazy We Built a Nation, it's pretty cynical. I think, though, it has a really interesting part at the beginning we'll listen to about the history of America and its racial coding and its laws. So listen here for 4 minutes with me.
Hey, it's John Biewen.
It wasn't John Smith. Who was? John Rolfe. Yeah, don't get your history from Disney. So John Rolfe marries Pocahontas. Now, is this the great love story Disney tells? No. What's John looking to do? What's his goal here? He's making an alliance, as one might have made in Europe, in order Power's always right. If I ask the question, just say power. But and yes, it is about power, but it's specifically about obtaining land so that he might build wealth. Now, how does John turn out? Does he turn out fairly well economically? He does. John turns out he's our first tobacco magnate. John turns out very well.
Suzanne mentions this marriage so she can connect it to something that happens decades later, when the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1680 effectively defines a white man for purposes of colonial citizenship.
So their first definition, and I paraphrase grossly, this is the essence, was a white man is someone with no blood whatsoever that is Negro or Indian, as they would have said, and we will assign the following rights and privileges. Now, what would be the problem with such a definition?
The problem was that definition would have excluded the descendants of John Rolfe and Pocahontas, and by then those descendants were big shots, rich landowners.
So we have a problem. We have a conundrum in the colony of Virginia.
What to do?
What we didn't do is even more illustrative than what we did. What we didn't do is say, a white man is someone with no blood whatsoever, etc., etc. However, we will allow these Indian people, as they would have said, to maintain their wealth and maintain their land as Indians. That's not what we do. That's not how this goes. What we said is a white man is someone with no blood whatsoever, etc., except for the descendants of John Rolfe and Pocahontas. We made them white. Is that the power to define reality?
All right, but that's just some 17th century weirdness, right? Well, 2.5 centuries later, the now Commonwealth of Virginia in the United States of America was passing its Racial Integrity Act of 1924 amidst the eugenics craze, trying to prevent race mixing. The act adopted the one-drop rule for black people, declaring those with any African ancestry colored, but the state held on to the Pocahontas exception. It defined as white people with up to 1/16 Native American ancestry, keeping John Rolfe's and Pocahontas's aristocratic descendants inside the white people tent.
Is this a little bit crazy? It gets crazier, and we need to understand that, because folks, on crazy we built a nation.
So there's the episode title. Sorry. So I brought that in because first it's fascinating and deeply problematic. To start coding race is where we're headed next in the artificial ways that was done in the legislatures and society in general. But this is just a particularly pointed example using some texts that we've already looked at. And I just pulled in this Monacan article that we read yesterday so you can see all of this written out again. All of what he was referring to, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, holds on to this, the 164th Indian blood rule. That is, elite Virginians who claim to descend from Pocahontas and John Rolfe. Which is stunning, really, that this is something that the legislature saw as logical. Even just considering that Pocahontas can marry John Rolfe and be considered, quote-unquote, white, to retain the power of that station, but that another Indian could not marry a white man and be considered white. So really, truly, it, as she says, is crazy in her narration. And it's going to set the scene for where we head next week. The ways that, in many important ways, America was a beacon for liberty. And we're going to look at the way that it attracted people to its shores for the freedom that could be offered here. But then still some old world thinking around racism that was seeded with all of that liberty. So how do we get to that place exactly? Let's look at these documents to explore even where the Native Americans went once the British came to stay. Here's my tagline for today. The British settled the South to the Northeast. So I set that up as two different groups, or two different things that could have happened to Indians. Pushed west or assimilated. But there's a third thing. It is that they could have been enslaved. And we're going to spend a couple of moments just considering the question of the Indian slave trade. It was an immensely profitable slave trade at first, but it was really short-lived. Didn't work out. Why not? This is going to be really important to understanding what slave trade did work out, and we will take that up in our early colonial unit. Obviously, it didn't really work out, but I mean, was profitable and set up the nation. So pause the screen and read this page. Pause me right now. And pause me now as well and read this page. So this is the question posed to your classmates. You don't have to fill out anything, but I do want you to consider it and try to answer it in your mind. And you'll also answer it in your stems. Why didn't it work? Well, on the one hand, there were a lot of very successful rebellions from Indians who were captives. Because they knew the land, they knew more in many cases than their employers or slave masters. They could rebel. They could fight back, and violently if necessary, to free themselves back to their tribes. So that's one reason. But the second reason is disease. And I've alluded to this week. The diseases that came to the South, especially yellow fever, malaria, decimated the native populations, decimated lots of populations, including the Europeans themselves. And so they died. Another way to get out of slavery. Not a good way. And that brings us to this question. The question of the day. It's the last line from that reading that you just saw on the screen. Naturally, the colonists look for a different solution to their labor needs, one less vulnerable to disease than European servants and Indian slaves. Who did they find? We think about this together as a class. The answer you could write here is Africans. They find Africans. And that will set up our unit for next week. So the stem for today, Indians were captured in slave raids, but because so. So write that down, please, in your big Google Doc for today and try to reflect some of your understandings from today's lesson there. The last thing we do is another quiz. And before we do, I'll show you the results from the Pocahontas quiz. Really good. Our average was almost an A, and that's amazing. Y'all are really doing well with the comprehension of these pieces of information. And I think what you're probably seeing is that I'm not actually asking you in these quizzes to tell me what you know. Asking you to make connections, read between the lines, think about synonyms for words, things like that. Because I believe that the more you know about a subject, the more engaging the reading is, the more connections you can make. And then the more advantageous that all of that is in your performance with reading comprehension. So far, your performance on this suggests that the information does help, even if it's not being asked directly. What year did John Smith arrive? I don't ask that, but just knowing these characters allows you to perform with such excellence. So we're going to do it one more time. Today, please finish out our work for the week by taking this quiz, a letter from Chief Powhatan to John Smith. You can access the quiz on this slideshow, or you can go to our agenda and it's linked there. After you finish that, you're done for the week. Have a great weekend.